Hi all, greetings of the day. We are now going to look into Buchi Emecheta's Feminism with a small f. And it's a long essay, so you'll be dealing with the first part of the essay in part 1 of my video. So here we go. Buchi Emecheta's Feminism with a small f is found in the book Criticism and Ideology, Second African Writers Conference. It's edited by Kirsten Holst Peterson, Scandinavian Institute of African Studies in the year 1988. So, in this particular essay, she discusses her artistic concerns and feminist perspective. Especially, she talks about how African feminism differs significantly from Western feminism due to its distinct cultural values and sexual identity of African women. So she begins the essay by saying or by proclaiming that she is just an ordinary writer, and she says that she just had to write. And she says if she doesn't have to write, and if she doesn't write, she'll be put in an asylum. So she says for some of them, communicating is very, very important, and she has to do it by all means, and that's what she does it. And she says she happens to be one of them for whom communication is very significant. In fact, she also confesses saying she tried getting appointments in university, going and working there, trying to be a critic. But then at one point of time, she felt that she cannot criticize others' work. That's when she remembers how when her husband burns her first book, she does not feel happy. She immediately told him, "Hey, you didn't burn my book, but you burnt one of my children." And she says, "Yeah, my babies, they were very, very ugly when they were born. They had big heads like their father, and their bodies were like me. And when I can make that out, but when somebody else looked at the pram and they said, 'What an ugly baby,' she says, I wouldn't have forgiven them. I wouldn't have accepted it." So, it's the same thing. Nobody would want their work to be criticized. So once a critic questioned her, "As a writer, as a person, as a woman, you have so much anger in you. How do you manage it?" She says, "I just bear it." And she says, I bear it, and I try to, if I can't bear my anger, I try to vent it out in my books. And that's what I do. And that's how she tries to manage her anger, she says. And then she goes on to tell the readers or the audience at the conference about her background. She says that she was born in Lagos in Nigeria, and there she was partly raised in Lagos, then partly in her village Ibuza. And she says that she loves to tell stories even when as a child. Okay, even as a child she wanted to tell stories. And she remembers or tells the audience as well as the readers how her parents came from Ibuza, a rural community, and then they moved on to a city, Lagos in Nigeria, just in search of work. And these people, her parents, were partly educated, and the education along with it brings the religion also, the religion of the colonizers. And so they started embracing CMS, that's to say they started going to the church of the missionary society. And she recalls how their parents were from the old Igbo kingdom, which is also the Igbo kingdom, and they valued their culture and everything. And so their parents were very particular that she and her brother were acquainted with the life of the Igbos in Ibuza, their homeland. And so whenever they had to be in Lagos, they were there only for some time, and most of the time they were sent to their homeland or their roots, and then during the rains they were taught to help in the farming. or help with the farming, be on the farm. And if they were in Lagos, the parents felt that they will have loose morals and that they would speak in Yoruba all the time. And so their parents were very, very particular that they learn the vigorous Igbo life or the Igbo life. So she even says that even in Nigeria, they discriminate between the Igbos and the Yorubas. And then here she comes to tell us about how at home she came across many storytellers, or rather, she uses the phrase real storytellers. And even in Yoruba, they tell stories beating their drums, and the children followed the storyteller, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. We all remember that, the Pied Piper who came to the town infested with rats and who led the rats to the cave as promised. The mayor of the city didn't give him enough money, so he played the pipe, and then all the children also followed him to the cave, and that's the story. And here she recollects how the children in the Yoruba communities followed the storytellers like the Pied Piper, and so here you find a kind of a literary illusion. And then, but the real storytellers of the Igbo, they differed from the Yoruba storytellers. How did they differ? They had one's mother as their storyteller, and normally, or I wouldn't say it's the biological mother, because she says they had one mother, and that mother could be the big mother, her aunt, or anybody that the child belonged to. And the child did not have only one single mother, that's the biological one. It had many mothers. It's quite surprising, right? We are a little intrigued to know how did the child have many mothers. So these children, they would sit at the feet of the storyteller who was their big mother, and they would keep listening to the mother, mesmerized because the mother had a trance-like voice and so on. So what was the content of this story? The mothers most often narrated stories that dealt with or delved into heroic deeds of their ancestors, or they told about their mores and customs. Now, this is very important. Mores are the social norms, the traditions that a society follows. And we know that Africans are known for their oral tradition, and it's the oral tradition that helps them in the upkeeping of their communal tradition and customs. So here, these grandmothers or these big mothers or whoever is the storyteller of the family, they see to it that their tradition is upheld and that it is passed on from one generation to another. And now that's the content of the story. How was it narrated? Yes, of course, it was narrated orally, but then in a sing-song way, because that's how they have memorized it, in a sing-song way. So till the age of 14, Emecheta had been believing that when they sang, probably they took up different tones or whatever it might be. When they sang in such a way that she felt that they were inspired by some spirits. So that's what she felt. And therefore, visiting their native land was always a moment of enjoyment because they had real storytellers there. And these real storytellers gave them information through their stories. You know that when you look at the oral tradition of Africa, you find that that's what's happening. They give you it is their stories are totally packed with information about the origin, about the creation myths, about how the society came up, and it also focused on all the mores, the customs, as she rightly points out. So it was quite entertaining to the little girl Emecheta, who always visited her hometown. And therefore, since then, even as a child, Emecheta seemed to have been determined to be a storyteller. And who was her inspiration? She wanted to be a storyteller like her big mother when she grew older. Okay, and so she wanted to at school also. So this storytelling practice was taken with her along with her to the school also, and she found that there were people from many places, and she wanted to narrate stories to people from many places. But then what's the language that she'll choose? Of course it's going to be English. But then she finds that the language that she's going to adopt for a global audience is not her first language, it's neither her second language nor her third language, but it's her fourth language. And so it takes a little time for her to master that language, and she finds that when she's doing that, the charm of the story is getting lost a bit, the color of it is fading away. All that is because English is not something that's closer to her heart as a mother language, and so she has to master her English. And the English teacher at school had always been telling her that she should be improving upon her English. Precisely at this time, she's been taken up by the late poet Wordsworth, and she tells her teacher, "See, I'm going to write like him." And immediately the teacher says, "Hey, here, you've been talking too proudly, so please go to the chapel and make a confession there." And she says, "Go and ask for forgiveness," because she tells the little child, "Pride goeth before a fall." But then, this little girl didn't go to the chapel, mainly because she thought God had other important things to do then, rather than listening to her dreams, especially the dreams of a person who hails from Igbo bush culture and the historic Yoruba, because these two dreams were really, really unattainable, she says. They had wild dreams, and probably that kept them going on. We do not know. Okay, so somehow there has been an influence of the colonizers on the little girl Emecheta. But then the early missionaries did not influence the African mind a lot. However, she was into the art of communication, of pictures, music, writing, oral folklore, and all of these were vital to the human, and this hardly had anything to do with the colonizers. So she starts to communicate. She starts to adopt writing or take refuge in writing, because when she is full of anger, she wants to give vent to it. That's what we found in the earlier slides. And so she starts with her first attempt to write a book, and the book is The Bride Prize. But the husband didn't really appreciate her. And akin to her English teacher, who told her in the school when she wanted to be like Wordsworth, or when she wanted to write poems like Wordsworth, her teacher told that pride goeth before a fall. And similar to that, her husband also resents her and says, but as days go by, at the age of 20, at the tender age of 20, because she got married quite earlier itself, in her teens. So at the age of 22, she becomes husbandless and is with 5 young children. So she feels that at that moment, when she wants to communicate, when she wants to write, she feels that she's not yet too old like her big mother, and that she needs to wait till she becomes like her big mother, and not just wait till she becomes old like her big mother, but earn string of degrees before writing, because only then she can make writing her livelihood. But then the family was fast growing, and she started pursuing a degree. Especially she started mastering in English language, and she also chose sociology and continued writing because she wanted to write on the society. So the family was also growing up. Along with that, when she started writing books and sending it to publishers, there were enough and more rejections in the year, enough and more rejections that all the rejection papers could be used to decorate a room. It was there were lots of rejections. That's how she says. But in the year 1972, there was a new statesman who serialized her work, and so her first book started appearing as a serial. Now, She's been writing for a long time, and rather that has been her livelihood for her, and she's been rearing her children, young children, with the money earned from writing. And now at this point of time, her children also are all grown up, and they want to leave the home, and they also move away. Do you know what they choose? They also have chose to write, or they also start to write like her mother, and she feels proud about it, and she says probably writing runs in my family. So she says, probably we're all doing what my big mother did long back. Actually, the big mother has been a great storyteller for almost 3 decades, for 30 years, but then she was doing all that for free, unlike Buchi Emecheta, who had been making a living out of writing. So she says that was the difference. Whenever her big mother told stories, it was in the moonlight, but then here Emecheta, so it was oral tradition, keeping on to the oral tradition amidst a natural background or set against a natural background. But then Emecheta types it. So she has adopted the written mode, and she talks about where she got her typewriter from. She says she got it from Woolworths in London, and because we know that she settled down in London, and we know that she herself tells about her weakness, and she says she's not so good in reading her own writing. Yeah, that happens even after I make a video. I don't want to watch it. Probably that's what Emecheta says. After writing, she doesn't want to read because she feels that and she proceeds further to say writing is a very lonely profession. When you're writing, you cannot have people around you, because when you're at your own desk, you need to think about the ideas, reason them out, whether you can have them or not, and then give them a form, a structure of a fiction or stories. And sometimes she's been making a living out of it. And some of the characters that she creates in the fictional world might also be a reflection of the lives of the characters whom she encounters in reality. So she comes on to the point when she meets the audience and says, hey, conferences such as these help us meeting people, and so we don't go insane, because all the time we are sitting in a room or at a desk and keep continuously writing. And so when we meet people, it's not weird, and we are saved from insanity or from becoming strange. So then she proceeds further to say normal questions are the oft asked questions or repetitive questions are, who are you writing for? And she says, I don't know, I just write. I don't know who will be picking up my books, but somebody will be picking up my book. And she says, I don't know if the same question is asked to the painters or the sculptors or anybody else, because they cannot control their painting. When they are still painting, they cannot say who will really love their painting. It's the same case with the with the writers too. Nobody can say who's going to read their books. And so immediately she starts comparing. See, in oral tradition, there is this technique of using a parable, and you find Emecheta using that in her essay. She says, imagine a mother carrying a child on her back, and when she's carrying, she just thinks that she's carrying the child on the back, but hardly will she realize that the child, when the mother is walking along with the child, she won't realize what the child is picking up on the way. Same is the case with the book that she writes. And so she here you see that she says the child is free to move its hands, and the mother doesn't know what the child is carrying, and therefore she finds that the question is little not okay. So she finds the question rather patronizing, and she tells herself that she not think of the readers when she is writing, and that she will write or pour out her hearts. Then next is she says in the writing, so what does she really do? She chronicles everyday events, and when she chronicles them, she weaves them into a piece of a literary work, and the fabric is so beautiful for people to admire at. And so she says the writers have the freedom or liberty to control, imagine. Sometimes facts are clubbed with fantasy, imagine and then present it in their work or document in their work. So, and whom does she write for? She writes for everybody. She says she doesn't have a particular group of audience, she writes for everybody. And as she had been telling earlier, the writers, she feels, have the control over their subject. And so she's very clear. She says, I don't deal with ideological issues. And she takes pride in saying that she just loves talking about the daily routine or little happenings of everyday life. And she goes further to associate the author in herself with an African woman that she is. And she says, being an African woman or born in Africa, I see things through an African woman's eyes naturally. And so she seems to be recording all of those little happenings that she speaks in her books, in the happenings, not of the daily happenings, not in the lives of somebody else whom she doesn't know, but in the lives of the African women whom she really knows well. And then she says, oh, when I do this, I'm labeled, I'm given a title, I'm branded. And what am I branded? I'm branded as a feminist. And then she says, yeah, I'm a feminist, but a feminist with a difference. And what's the difference? I'm a feminist with a small f. Why so? Because I write about families and I still believe in families. I don't talk about being all by myself, rebelling and so on. I still believe in families, she says. And she says she writes about African women who tried very hard to bring their family together, to hold their family together, and they keep their family together until it is really impossible. And you know, Africans are known for their familial values. Okay, and then Emecheta is very plain and blatantly true when she says, I have no sympathy for women who do not care for the children or who desert their children for either for the career or for another man. So here she says, I don't like them. So, and she says, I don't like a woman who deserts her children, nor do I like a woman who just clings on to some man because she wants the marriage to be just sacred and maintained and just to be respected in the society. But then she says all this can be undone, and she says the only thing that can bring women up is through education. So women can be empowered only through education, she feels, and she makes a point saying education helps women. And then she says, why does it help women? Because it helps women to read, to internalize all that they read, and then rear a generation. So she believes very strongly in this fact that if one educates a woman, one educates a community. And if one educates a man, one educates a man alone. So that's her belief. And so she is very, very strong in the idea that women can be empowered only through education. So she says, yeah, I write about the daily happenings from the point of view of an African woman, but then sometimes I also write about wars and nuclear holocaust and all that. And despite writing about the life and experiences of women, she talks about the life and experiences of women who live under the conditions of war and nuclear holocaust also, but that's very rare, she says. So as an ordinary writer, she says that her style is very simple, but that's her way. And so she has to be looked at from two perspectives. So as a writer, her style is simple and that's her way. But as a person also, she's simple, because in the beginning itself she says, I'm just an ordinary writer. She just doesn't put on some airs. So she says, I'm just an ordinary writer, quite simple and unsophisticated. And she says cultural people really make her nervous. So she's quite simple, and whatever she's doing it from her heart. And suddenly she comes up with a tabooed topic. I don't know. But then she says, here is something that she thinks about polygamy. And she says, in general, people think that polygamy is a kind of an oppression inflicted on women, but it's not. Only in certain cases it's so. She's comes up with a different perspective. When I read, I felt, yeah, okay. So she realizes that when she visited Nigeria often, some women capitalize on polygamy and they work it for their favor, and she documents that here. So she starts recalling something that happened a few weeks ago, how in her bedroom in Ibuza, when she was listening to a conversation, she heard that it was cool and damp, and she was debating whether to sleep or to wake up. It was almost 6 in the morning, and she did not even have to look at the clock to find out the timing, because from the songs of the morning she could make out, and children were all busy fetching water, and there was a cock also that was crowing here and there. And that's when she heard the voice of Nwango. Who is that Nwango? She's the senior wife of Obike, a man, and his senior wife, and they're talking. And that day, probably she hears them very intimate, and the man seems to be approaching her for the physical pleasure, and she says that it cannot happen because she has other things to do. She says, how can you come to me early in the morning? She says the children are sleeping next door, and she even calls him a beast. She says, why don't you go to your new wife? And this is something that we cannot imagine in other places. So she says so, and but then immediately the man complains with a loud mouth, saying that she doesn't cook for him, and that she doesn't come to his bed whenever she is asking, whenever he wants her. But then he even goes to the extent of asking her, why did I pay the bride price for? And then he's full of anger, and righteous anger, in fact, okay. But then the senior wife is very clear. She says, you go to your new wife, and for which he gives a reason, saying she's the new wife is pregnant. And this woman has her own reasons to give. She says, I need the energy for the farm and for the trading in the market day. So about this market day, I'll talk a little later, because Emecheta herself reserves that for the later part. And therefore she says, if she's pregnant, get another wife. See, that's so simple. No woman in any other continent would even imagine that to happen. But Mwange insists that. And Emecheta is like towards the end, the mother-in-law, when the conversation is still taking place, her mother, Emecheta's mother-in-law, comes there, and she says, don't listen to them. That's how things go on. They're always so. And these men, and the mother-in-law is in favor of her daughter-in-law, not her son. She says the men are always like that. They are shameless, and that they think that women can be their partners any day and any night. And which girl, he can even go and get married to another girl, but which girl will get married to him? Because all the girls in this village know that he's too lazy to go regularly to his farm. At that moment, Emecheta just mulls over and thinks about her own mother-in-law, who had borne 13 children in Lagos, mainly because her father-in-law couldn't afford to have another room for a new wife. And she wonders, why did she ever think of it then? So because here it says in Lagos, her husband, when she says her husband, it's her mother-in-law's husband, did not have a room, and so he could not bring home another wife. So, but then if they were in the village, their life would have been different, and that's the aspect. So now, after giving us a picture of polygamy in Nigeria, she now moves on to step into the shoes of the Western sisters. She says, I know when I talk about polygamy, it's difficult for you all to understand. She says, yes, sex is important to us, but then that's not the center of us. Okay, probably many Nigerian women, if they are so promiscuous, they take up sex work as for economic reasons, but that's different. And she also comes at this point to talk about a Yoruba saying which says a woman must never allow a man to sleep with her, because at the end of the day, if he's not going to work, and if she's going to have debt all over, she should never be with that man, says Emcheta. And that's very, very different kind of a view. So she says, and she also goes further to say, some of our women, as it is, they are with their husbands, they do something out of duty, love, in order to have their children. So probably young women, when they want, Nigerian women, their concept of being with a man is different. They might be romantically in love with their husband, but then soon after having children, their loyalty from their husband is shifted to their children, and they will do anything and everything in power that they can for the betterment and for the welfare of their children. That's how it shifts. Okay, so in the villages, the women normally seek, and she goes on to say, talk about the women power in the villages. She says the women in the villages, they don't bother, or they are not dependent on their husband. Rather, they go seek the company of the women of their age, and they make friends with them, and they go to the market together. And even so, they go to the market together. Different age women are for different purposes. So if they want advice, they go either to their mother or mother-in-law also. That's quite surprising, right? Okay, so sometimes if they want some help, they would go to another woman in the same family who would share their housework, as Nwango had earlier cited. Okay, so one day, the day her husband wanted her, initially she said she wanted to go to the market. It was the big market day, so she had to get up. When it was a big market day, they had lots of routine to be done, so she would get up early to go to the market. And there, the moment they go to the market, they contribute 20 naira, which is almost 10 pounds in London. And so that they do to save the funds for the market women. And that's a kind of an economy that they create, a kind of money that they save. So they all put that money, and then they pick out lots and see who gets that money for that month. And that's how it's rotated, and that money helps them raise capital for their business without even having to go to the bank. And because most of the banks do not lend money to a woman, that's another gender issue that the African women face. So when they go to the market, they have to contribute 20 naira in the beginning itself. Afterwards, in the evening, she has to put otugo. Otugo is a traditional attire, a ceremonial attire, and she has to be dancing in the Agbalani group. And there, when they go, they dance. And see, it is not just for their own welfare. They go and dance at the second burial of the grandmother, not their own grandmother, but one of their members. So they still promote that community living that they had been upholding in the ancient times. Okay, so they go, and when they go, they wear that traditional attire, and in an Akango style. That's a particular style. And so to buy this dress also, they'll have to keep saving their money for almost 3 years. And there's a description of their head tie, navy blue head tie, Japanese fan, black flat shoes or slippers. But there is a very determined line, or I should say emphatic line, which says none of them were bought by their husbands. They have earned everything out of their own hard work. And so Nwango also worked on her cassava farm, and after working there for 4 days, she would make an African dish out of sweet and the cassava powder, milk and all that, and she sold and made money out of that too. And when did they do that? They did that on the 5th day of Eke market day. And so after all of these earnings only, the profit out of all of these only, she would give the 20 naira for esusu. That's a common collection. And one of them will get that money. So one of the women will get it, and it is with that the women could send their children to college or spend the money as she liked. Isn't that really good? So at the funeral dance, the group not just danced. See, to be involved, we know that music and dance are part and parcel of the African community. So it's not just a dance, but they be with the bereaved family, the bereaved lady. They come and contribute only 20 naira during each market day, but now they give a huge amount of 1,000 naira to the bereaving family from the fund that they generated. And the dance, it will go on till late in the night, almost 8 p.m. And after that, when they go home also, they'll keep singing their heads off, and they party. Okay, so they have their drinks, whiskey, beer, gin, brandy, and name it, and they have everything. And if the husband says, hey, you haven't cooked for me, they say, you get another woman, do it. And that's the merit of polygamy, she says. And then he might find another woman who might be 17 or 18, and this girl, when she comes to her husband, she's full of romantic love, and then she would serve the husband the way she wants to. But by the time she becomes 25, she becomes wiser, and for her, the husband is not the most important person. Then it's her children. And Nwango's husband is almost a kind of an attractive man, and most of the women in the village feel so. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of part 1 of this essay. Meet you all in the part 2 of the essay. Thank you so much.